Well, I would say that whether I'm writing a story as a creative writer, or whether I'm writing about a story, about why I write a story, or about reading a story, which falls into the realm of criticism, I'm mainly preoccupied with defining the importance of certain pleasures. The pleasures of writing, the pleasures of reading, the pleasures of writing about the world we live in. And I think these are trying to make sense of this whole exercise and why it is important preoccupies me both as a creative writer and as a critic. That is, both as somebody who writes stories and who writes about writing stories. Well, as a child, I was not interested in studies at all. The one thing that I was interested in was literature, English, and even that I came to gradually, because when I was very small, my parents only spoke to me in Bengali. This is part of the whole Bengali middle class ethos, which was a sort of nationalistic in a particular kind of way. So when I was admitted to school, which is a famous English medium school in Bombay called the Cathedral School, I actually didn't know any English at all. I only knew Bengali and Hindi. So I think my headmistress asked my mother to give me ladybird books and comic books to read, to pick up the language. And I picked up the language through reading these comic books and ladybird books. And I think my first kind of forays into writing had to do with the fact that with the excitement of having picked up this new language, English. So I began to write stories in it when I was quite small, and then write verse in it. I was always interested in the literary form as a form of play, even as a child. By that time, I went to read English at University College London. I was quite serious about becoming a published poet. And my going to London to read English had this ambition as a kind of subterranean driving force. That is, my main concern was not academics or getting a degree from University College London in English, but to become a published poet. In the meanwhile, over the 3 years that I did read English, I began to discover myself, I think, as an essayist. As a writer who writes about literature and who enjoys writing about literature and everything that it means historically, but also primarily in terms of literary value. I began to get drawn to that. And then I took a year off, began to write my novel, and again conspired to go back to England, this time to do a DPhil or a doctorate at Oxford, on the poetry of D.H. Lawrence. And again, I was interested in the field, but I also had that subterranean ambition of continuing to go to England in order to get myself published as a novelist. In this process, I actually wrote my first 2 novels and published them even before I'd completed my PhD, my DPhil. But towards the end of my time in Oxford, I very much enjoyed bringing together my thoughts on Lawrence in that DPhil, which was quite an unusual DPhil and had been approached in an unusual way. And at the same time, I'd also begun to write as an essayist for the London Review of Books and the Times Literary Supplement. And that's how the work of criticism came together with my work as a writer, and each flowed into the other. I hope it impacts on the lives of other writers. I hope it impacts to a certain extent on the lives of on the cultural life of this country and outside. That is, I hope it impacts on anybody who is interested in writing in India, whether they're a lay person, but also whether they are young or established writers themselves, or whether they belong to other disciplines like history, the social sciences, or outside. Anybody who feels that for them it isn't enough to just think of categories like Indian writing or even India in a particular kind of way and just be satisfied with these categories. I am an Indian. This is India. India is a wonderful place. Indian writing is wonderful. Anybody who wants something more or something different, well, I hope it will impact on them. I hope it will help, and I think it will help because it's very unusual for a prize to be given in any country, but certainly to India, in India, to literary studies. And even support for writers, forget about academics who work on writing, but even support for writers and well-known writers in this country is rare. I mean, there might be a lot of celebrity type discussions on writing, but actual serious support, which includes monetary support, is very rare in this country, and is sad in a country which in other ways is celebrating itself and so many aspects of itself. The whole intellectual activity to do with the understanding of the arts is something that is terribly important in our country, and we still don't have even a language to understand why it is important, leave alone having a language with which to understand the arts themselves and what they mean to us as a people right now. So in this sense, something that suddenly throws a light on such an activity and enterprise cannot but be a very positive thing. The biggest challenge is, I think, for people to firstly understand that there is a great importance to the very nuanced, delicate, on the whole, empirically unverifiable world, on the whole ambiguous and ambivalent world of literature. So when you are entering the world of literature, whether it's literary studies or a literary text or a piece of writing, you're entering a world which, unlike the sciences, is not empirically verifiable, instrumental, important in ways which we can categorize and measure, whose outcome we can measure as we can do with a scientific experiment. It is also a world whose value exists in a language that necessarily has to be ambiguous and ambivalent. The moment you begin to say, this is good because of reasons that are spoken of in a language which is completely unambiguous and black and white, then in fact you lose the power of this whole field. So you're faced with a field of which we have which has a long history in our country, going back to the beginning of time. We have one of the oldest literary traditions in our country, but we are faced with a field whose value lies in between things, in between how we conventionally understand value. And to understand that this could be actually important and interesting to our cultural life in contemporary India, and that by marginalizing it completely, we lose a very, very important part of our thinking, which actually affects us all around in the way we express ourselves, in the way we talk about things. I think for us to be able to understand that and then be able to go beyond that and take that risk, because it is the riskiest of all intellectual exercises, this whole business to do with literature. To take that risk, to go into that field, I think that is the challenge.